There is a moment, somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, when winter stops being a season and becomes something closer to a verdict. The temperature drops so far below freezing that the air itself feels solid. The snow does not fall gently here. It comes sideways, driven by winds that move through the passes like a current of cold fire. And when it settles on the high plateaus, it settles for months. No roads reach these places, no emergency services, no warm infrastructure waiting at the edge of the valley. There is only the family, the flock, the shelter, and the knowledge that has been passed from hand to hand across generations without ever being written down. And then, in the middle of all of this, a lamb is born. That is the moment everything becomes urgent. Not because a lamb is born every season. It is. Not because the family does not know what to do. They do. But because a newborn lamb in deep Afghan winter is one of the most fragile creatures imaginable. And what that family does in the next several hours will determine whether the animal lives or dies. What makes this story extraordinary is not the drama of survival itself. It is the sophistication hidden inside it. Every decision the family makes, where they place the lamb, what they wrap it in, how long they keep it away from the cold ground, how soon the mother is guided back, what the children are assigned to watch. Each of these decisions carries the weight of accumulated intelligence. None of it is guesswork. All of it has been tested across generations of loss and adaptation, and what remains is only what works. If you have ever wondered how people live at the edge of what seems possible, stay with this story. It is going to show you something that most of the world has never seen. If stories like this one speak to you, stories about the hidden intelligence of traditional life, the engineering of survival, and the people who carry ancient knowledge into extreme environments, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. There is much more of this kind of documentary waiting for you here. To understand why the birth of a lamb in winter is such a high-stakes event, you first need to understand the landscape that surrounds it. The shepherd families of Afghanistan's high mountain regions, communities living in areas like the Hazarajat Plateau, the Wakhan Corridor, and the ranges of Badakhshan, exist in one of the most climatically severe environments that any pastoral culture on Earth has occupied continuously. Winter at altitude in these regions is not measured in discomfort. It is measured in survival thresholds. Temperatures can fall to -25 or 30 degrees Celsius. Snow can accumulate to depths that swallow fence posts and transform familiar paths into featureless white expanses. The grazing land disappears entirely for months. The flock must be fed from stored fodder, from dried grasses and hay gathered during the brief warm season, sometimes supplemented with grain that has been rationed carefully since autumn. Every animal in the flock represents not just food or income, but capital. The living savings account of a family that has no bank, no subsidy, and no margin for catastrophic loss. In this context, the annual lambing season, which often falls in late winter or early spring precisely because of traditional breeding calendars designed to align births with the first thaw, carries an enormous weight of economic consequence. Lose several lambs to cold, and you have lost a portion of the coming year's milk, meat, and wool. Lose a ewe during a difficult birth, and you have lost years of productive potential. The family does not think about this in economic abstractions. They think about it in the language of daily life, whether there will be enough to trade at the next market, whether the children will have wool for new clothes before next winter, whether the flock will have grown or shrunk by the time the mountain grasses return. A newborn lamb is therefore not merely a small animal shivering in the dark. It is a thread in a web of consequences that stretches forward across an entire year. And here is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable. Because what the family does when a lamb is born in deep winter is not a single act of care. It is a layered response, a sequence of interlocking decisions, each one solving a different part of the same problem, and together forming a system of neonatal management that would not be out of place if described in a veterinary manual, except that it was never written in any manual. It was written in memory. The first problem is heat. A newborn lamb arrives into the world wet and entirely without the capacity to regulate its own body temperature. In warmer climates, the mother's licking and the ambient air temperature handle most of this transition. In an Afghan highland winter, the ambient air temperature handles nothing except death. The lamb's wet coat becomes a conduit for heat loss rather than a barrier against it. And within minutes of birth, the animal is already fighting a losing battle against cold if nothing intervenes. The shepherd family knows this. The mother knows this too. And her instinct to lick the lamb immediately serves the same function that a towel serves in a hospital delivery room. It removes moisture, stimulates circulation, and begins the process of warming the skin. But in -20 temperatures, maternal licking alone is not enough. This is where the family steps in, and they do so with extraordinary precision. The first person to act is typically the woman of the household, or in families with older daughters, it is the senior female knowledge holder who takes charge of the birth. She arrives not empty-handed. She comes with materials that have already been prepared. Rough cloth, sometimes an old blanket or a piece of felt, occasionally a sheep's skin, and she begins to dry the lamb with a speed and thoroughness that mirrors exactly what every cold-weather livestock protocol recommends. The rubbing is firm, not gentle, because the goal is not just to dry, but to stimulate. The friction raises peripheral circulation, moves warmth back toward the surface of the skin, and activates the lamb's own metabolic heat production. She is essentially jump-starting the animal. What happens next is the detail that surprises most outsiders. The lamb does not go into a heated barn because there is no barn with mechanical heating. It does not go near an open fire because rapid external heat applied to a cold and wet newborn causes more problems than it solves. The body cannot equalize the temperature gradient fast enough, and the result can be tissue damage or shock. Instead, the lamb goes inside the family's living space. Not in a corner, not in a separate pen, into the shared warmth of the room where the family sleeps, eats, and lives. In the traditional architecture of Afghan highland homes, the thick-walled, low-ceilinged structures built of stone, mud brick, and compacted earth, the interior holds warmth with remarkable efficiency. The walls store heat during the day and release it slowly through the night. The floor, where the family sleeps on layered felt and woven mats, is the warmest zone in the house. The lamb is placed there. This is not sentiment. This is engineering. The family is using their living space as a temperature-controlled recovery environment because it is the most stable thermal zone available to them. And stability is exactly what the newborn animal needs. Not sudden heat, not fluctuating cold, a consistent warmth that allows the lamb's internal temperature to normalize gradually. What looks like a family inviting a small animal into their home is actually a precisely calibrated intervention that every professional livestock keeper in cold climates knows is necessary, and that these families developed independently through generations of observation, long before any outside authority arrived to explain it. The second problem is feeding, and this is where things become even more nuanced. A lamb that cannot nurse within the first few hours of life is a lamb in serious danger. Colostrum, the thick, antibody-rich first milk that the ewe produces immediately after birth, is not optional nutrition. It is the lamb's entire immune foundation. Without it, the animal has no protection against the bacterial environment of the flock, no defense against the respiratory infections that kill young livestock in cold conditions, and no energy reserve to sustain its own body heat through the next night. The window for colostrum absorption through the lamb's gut is short, typically around 18 to 24 hours before the intestinal lining changes, and the antibodies can no longer pass into the bloodstream. After that window, whatever the lamb drinks is food. Before it, what the lamb drinks is armor. The family knows this. Not in immunological language, of course. In the language of experience, they know that a lamb that does not drink in the first hours rarely survives the first week, and that a lamb that drinks well within the first hour almost always makes it through the critical period. So getting the lamb to the ewe, or getting the ewe's milk to the lamb, becomes the next urgent task. If the lamb is strong enough to stand, which after warming it often is, far sooner than would seem possible, the family guides it back to the mother with a care and patience that is almost choreographic. The ewe is managed, her udder is checked, and the lamb is positioned and encouraged until it latches. The shepherd watches this process not casually, but with intense attention, because a first-time ewe may reject a lamb she has not bonded with properly, especially if the lamb was removed from her immediately after birth for warming. This rejection risk is something the family manages actively. Bonding between ewe and lamb is scent-based in the critical early period, and if the lamb has been handled extensively and returns smelling of human hands, cloth, and indoor smoke, the ewe may not recognize it. Experienced shepherds know to rub the lamb with the ewe's own birth fluids before returning it, or to allow the ewe to smell the lamb before separation occurs whenever possible. This is not a technique described in a manual these families have read. It is a technique discovered through heartbreak, through the loss of lambs that were rejected and starved, through the slow understanding of what that rejection actually meant, and through the deliberate experiment of trying something different the next time. If the lamb is too weak to nurse on its own, the family moves to manual feeding. The ewe is held or positioned, and the milk is expressed by hand, then delivered to the lamb using whatever vessel is available. A small cup, a folded cloth, sometimes a makeshift implement fashioned from a hollowed reed, or a cleaned animal horn with a cloth tip. The feeding is slow and repeated at short intervals because a hypothermic lamb cannot handle large volumes of liquid and needs frequent small amounts rather than a single large feed. This is, again, exactly the protocol that modern veterinary cold-weather neonatal care recommends. The family arrived at it not through training, but through the same testing process that all genuine empirical knowledge comes from: doing something, watching what happened, and adjusting. If you are watching this and realizing that what you assumed was a simple rural existence is revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated, that is exactly what this channel is here to show you. Go ahead and like this video if you are feeling that recognition. It helps more people find this kind of documentary. The third problem, and this one is less obvious than the others, is the problem of the other animals. The flock does not stop being a flock because one lamb has been born. In a family that keeps anywhere from 30 to 100 sheep and goats, depending on their resources, the lambing season may produce multiple births across several weeks, and each birth carries its own risk. The decision to bring one lamb into the family's living space creates a question. What about the ewe? A ewe separated from her lamb for too long will grow distressed, and that distress affects her milk production. It also affects her willingness to nurse when the lamb is returned. So the family must manage a delicate balance between keeping the lamb warm indoors and keeping the ewe calm and connected enough that the reunion will work. In practice, this often means one family member, usually a younger child assigned to this task specifically, monitoring the ewe throughout the night. The child sits or sleeps near the flock's sheltered area, watching for signs of distress and reporting back. It sounds like a simple job. It is not. Reading a ewe's distress correctly requires understanding what normal behavior looks like versus what agitation looks like, knowing when to intervene and when to wait, and staying awake and attentive in conditions that are genuinely punishing. Afghan highland winters at night are not uncomfortable. They are dangerous. The child who does this job is not incidental to the family's survival system. That child is part of it, performing a specific function in a distributed network of care that spans the whole household. This is something that outside observers consistently misunderstand about traditional pastoral families in these environments. They look at the family and see poverty, simplicity, a lack of tools and technology. What they are actually looking at is a highly organized human system in which every member has a role, every role has a function, and the overall architecture of the household is designed to process survival challenges in parallel rather than sequentially. The father monitors the broader flock. The mother manages the newborn and the birth recovery. The older children handle the ewe observation and the fodder distribution. The younger children carry information between these zones. The household runs like a small organism, each part feeding information and action to every other part. And the house itself is part of the system. The traditional Highland Afghan home, built low to the ground to minimize surface area exposed to wind, with walls sometimes a meter thick made of stone packed with mud mortar, roofed with layers of brush, earth, and compacted clay, is not a primitive shelter. It is a thermal management structure that has been refined over centuries to solve the specific problem of keeping living things alive through a winter that would otherwise kill them. The low doorways minimize cold air intrusion every time someone enters. The single-room layout means that body heat from every sleeping person and animal contributes to the overall temperature. The hearth, positioned centrally in many traditional designs, radiates heat in all directions and draws cold air upward and out through a precisely sized opening that also prevents the interior from filling with smoke. Every dimension of that house was arrived at through testing and consequence. Every proportion represents a solved problem. The newborn lamb placed on the warm floor of that room is not lucky to be inside. It is inside because the family knows that this specific combination, the stable warmth of the thermal mass walls, the residual heat from the hearth, the additional body heat of sleeping humans, and the insulating properties of the felt and woven mats, creates an environment close enough to the ideal that the lamb's body can finish the work of self-stabilization. The family is not improvising. They are deploying a system. By morning, if everything has gone as it should, the lamb will be standing. Its legs, which were folded and trembling at birth, will be weight-bearing. It will have nursed, or been hand-fed enough times to have a visible fullness at its belly. Its ears, which were cold and pale in the first minutes, will have the faint warmth of circulation. The ewe will be calm. The child who monitored through the night will be asleep near the flock, worn out and successful. The family will move through their morning routines, checking the other animals, clearing any snow that accumulated around the entrance to the shelter, preparing the first meal of the day, with the particular quiet efficiency of people who have managed a crisis and come out the other side. What the family eats during this period is worth understanding, because their own nutrition is directly connected to their capacity to manage these nights. The traditional winter diet of Afghan Highland Shepherd families is dense, caloric, and specifically adapted to extreme cold. Dried mulberries, which store through winter and provide concentrated sugar energy. Hard bread made from wheat or barley, which keeps for weeks and can be softened in water or animal fat. Dried legumes, lentils, chickpeas, cooked slowly over the hearth fire into thick stews that warm from the inside and sustain energy through long, cold hours. Clarified butter, rendered from the summer's milk and stored in sealed clay containers, which adds caloric density to everything it touches, and which the body metabolizes into heat with remarkable efficiency. Green vegetables are absent. Fresh fruit is absent. But the diet is not deficient in the ways that a modern observer might assume. It is precisely calibrated to the energy demands of people who work outdoors in severe cold, manage large animal herds, and cannot afford the metabolic collapse that comes from inadequate caloric intake. The same intelligence that manages the lamb's feeding, frequent, appropriate in volume, timed to need, manages the family's own nutrition. They eat when they need to, in quantities matched to the work they are doing, using foods that store well and deliver reliably. The kitchen, such as it is, functions as a survival system as much as the barn does or the house does. Everything is interconnected. Everything serves the whole. There is a particular dimension of this life that is easy to miss entirely if you are watching from the outside, the role that memory plays in all of it. When the woman of the family picks up a newborn lamb and begins rubbing it in exactly the right direction, with exactly the right pressure, she is not consulting any external source. She is drawing on something that was placed inside her by the women who raised her, by her mother's hands guiding hers through the same motion when she was a child, by the stories told on winter nights about the lambs that were lost and the lambs that were saved, by the corrections offered quietly when she made a mistake in her first years as a primary caregiver. This knowledge is not written down. It has no official custodian. It lives in the bodies and memories of the women who carry it, and it passes forward not through documents, but through presence. Through the experience of being there, watching, doing, failing, adjusting. This is a form of knowledge transmission that modern societies have almost entirely replaced with written and digital alternatives, and the replacement carries a cost that is rarely acknowledged. Written knowledge can be stored and retrieved across generations without the original holder being present. But it cannot be felt. It cannot be adjusted in real time by a practiced hand reading the animal's response. It cannot carry the accumulated nuance of 1,000 individual decisions made by 1,000 individual people across centuries of seasonal repetition. The shepherd woman's knowledge of how to save a lamb is not inferior to a veterinary textbook. In some respects, it is richer because it was shaped by the actual conditions of this specific mountain, this specific flock, this specific cold, in a way that no general text can be. This is also why the disruption of these communities carries consequences that extend far beyond the social or the cultural. When a family abandons the high pastures because the conditions become unsustainable, because drought reduces the summer grasses, because economic pressure makes pastoralism unviable, because conflict forces movement into urban settings, what is lost is not just a way of life. What is lost is a body of accumulated technical knowledge about how to survive in that specific environment. Knowledge that took generations to build, and that cannot be reconstructed quickly or easily from the outside. The lamb that survived last night will grow. If it is female, it will join the breeding flock and produce lambs of its own in winters to come. If it is male, it will contribute to the family's meat and wool supply. Either way, the survival of that single small animal represents not only an economic gain for the family, but the continuation of a relationship between these people and these mountains that is measured in centuries rather than years. The flock is not just livestock. It is the means by which the family maintains its presence on land that would otherwise be uninhabitable. Without the sheep, there is no reason to stay. Without the family staying, the knowledge goes. Without the knowledge, no one can come back later and figure out how it was done. There are moments in a deep Afghan mountain winter when the cold achieves a kind of clarity. The air is so dry that sound carries strangely. You can hear the snow settling, the distant movement of animals, the low murmur of wind finding the cracks in the stone walls. Inside the family's home, the hearth fire has burned low enough that only embers remain, casting a dim orange warmth across the floor mats where children sleep in layered wool blankets. And somewhere in that warmth, on a folded felt pad near the wall, a lamb that should not have survived the night is breathing steadily. Its small chest rises and falls. Its legs are tucked beneath it in the posture of rest rather than collapse. The woman who saved it is already awake, already moving, already beginning the next round of tasks that will carry the family through another day. This is what survival intelligence looks like when it is fully formed. Not dramatic, not heroic in the cinematic sense, just precise, continuous, adaptive, and rooted in an understanding of the world so deep that it no longer requires conscious thought. It has become instinct, but an instinct built by knowledge rather than biology. The family does not think of themselves as engineers or scientists or experts. They think of themselves as people doing what needs to be done. But what needs to be done this well, in conditions this extreme, is extraordinary. It has always been extraordinary. The world simply has not been paying close enough attention to see it. What you watched in this story is a system, a complete, interlocking system of thermal management, nutritional timing, behavioral observation, architectural design, food preservation, family organization, and embodied knowledge, all activated by the single event of a lamb being born in the wrong season in the most unforgiving possible environment. Every piece of it was built by people who had no access to universities, no veterinary clinics, no textbooks, and no safety net. They built it from the raw material of experience and loss and the deep human drive to protect what matters. And it works. After everything, after centuries of isolation and hardship and seasons that seemed designed to break everything that tried to live through them, It still works. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most important things there is. If this story made you see something differently, if you caught yourself thinking about the hidden intelligence inside lives that are usually dismissed, misread, or simply never seen, then this channel exists exactly for you. Leave a comment below telling us what other traditional community, survival system, forgotten technology, or remote way of life you want us to explore next. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. There is a great deal more of this kind of story waiting, and each one will take you somewhere the standard documentary circuit has never thought to look.